Alright everybody, how we doing today? So, let us begin. So, there's a lot to talk about today, but today we'll be discussing Turkey. There'll be two articles in this video, so pay attention. For Putin, Turkish move into Syria, a chance to ramp up Middle East role. This one's from Reuters, and it goes forward to say, Turkey's incursion into Syria is an opportunity for Russia to dial up its influence in the region, as Washington appears to be pulling back, but the risks to Moscow's diplomacy will rise the longer the operation goes on, people close to the Kremlin say. In a phone call with Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan before the operation against U.S. allied Kurdish fighters, Russian leader Vladimir Putin and ally of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad made clear he hoped the incursion would be limited in time and scale, the sources said. The sooner this conflict situation is over, the better for everyone, said Andrei Kilmov, a senior pro-Putin lawmaker in Russia's Senate. I really hope our Turkish partners do everything to avoid even a chance conflict on the ground with Syrian government forces, and even more so with Russian soldiers. For Russia, it's a delicate balancing act. It has pledged to use its air power to help Assad retake all the territory he has lost in Syria's 8-year-old war, and has repeatedly stressed the importance of the country's territorial integrity. But it is also working with Turkey and Iran to push for a peaceful settlement it hopes will eventually reshape Syria's constitution and show that Russia can make peace as well as war. Critics say Moscow's efforts are a sham, aimed at yielding a fake political settlement, re-legitimize Assad, and attract funds from the European Union and the Gulf to rebuild Syria. For Moscow, success would cap a 2015 intervention in Syria that gave Russia new clout in the Middle East, and that it is keen to build on, particularly at a time when Washington appears to be distancing itself from the region. Now, I'm pretty mistrusting, alright? I have a very suspicious nature, and I really want to agree with this idea that that this is a fake political settlement aimed at gaining even additional clout in the Middle East and possibly even attracting funds from the European Union. And given the Middle Eastern situation, the EU has been historically pretty useless, whether it was making peace or war. But one thing they were at least able to do in that situation was give people money. That's something the EU seems really good at, actually. Taking money and then just giving it away. But all in all, I would say that... I'm just going to say that probably Russia is trying, at least putting their best foot forward to try and make some actual peace in the Turkish situation. I mean, they gotta be seeing what's going on over there, and they gotta be thinking to themselves, this is not acceptable. These people are dying. This is horrible. You know, some Russian citizens have gotta be thinking that. Because I cannot stress enough how horrifying that Turkish situation is over there in Syria. They gotta be thinking it. President Donald Trump pulled U.S. troops out of the way of Turkey's offensive earlier this week, drawing bipartisan criticism from members of Congress who credit the Kurds with fighting alongside America's defeat of the Islamic State. Ankara brands the Syrian Kurdish YPG militia as terrorists because of their ties to militants who have waged an insurgency in Turkey. A Turkish operation that drags on too long or gets too messy may upset the Kremlin diplomatic efforts. Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov said on Thursday that while Moscow is sympathetic to Ankara's security concerns, Putin told Erdogan his forces should tread carefully. We consider it important that all sides show restraint and carefully weigh their practical steps so as not to damage the measures taken to achieve a political settlement, said Ushakov. He pointed out the first scheduled meeting of a Moscow-backed Syrian Constitutional Committee on October 29th as something that should not be disrupted, and said it would be unacceptable for Moscow if civilians suffered in the Turkish offensive. Like I said, I really want to believe that they're trying to put their best foot forward, but I can't totally dismiss the accusation that they're just trying to gain clout and gain money from the EU and other similar organizations. I can't totally dismiss that possibility. So I don't really know what to make of this. But if you ask me, I really think they're just trying to put their best foot forward. Intermediary. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov made clear on Thursday that Moscow is already positioning itself for a role as intermediary in resolving the latest twist in Syria's long-drawn-out conflict. That could involve brokering talks between Ankara and Damascus, which wants Turkish forces out in between Damascus and the Kurds who want a measure of autonomy inside Syria that Assad has so far shown no sign of giving. Lavrov told reporters Moscow would try both, noting apparent enthusiasm for Russia's service from both the Syrian and Kurdish sides. "Let us see what we can do," Lavrov said. Matha Balog, I probably said that totally wrong, a research fellow at Chatham House in London, said Russia is probably the only player in the room among the grown-ups who can talk with everyone in the room at the same time, whether it's Israel and Iran or with Kurdish forces in Turkey or Assad and everyone else. For Putin, this would be a significant geopolitical win. If he manages to fix this, it would be considered a major political victory, said Andrei Kurtinov, head of the Russian International Affairs Council, a think tank close to the Russian Foreign Ministry. And there may be Putin's true motive. Fixing the situation, it indeed would be considered a major political victory. It would make Russia look very saintly in this situation, and maybe that's really what he's trying to do. Maybe Putin wants to paint Russia as sort of the hero of the situation, the hero of the crisis, the elegant King Arthur, and therefore maybe painting his advisors as sort of the Merlin. That would certainly be a good move on Russia's part, considering how much they get demonized these days. Excuse me. Putin could argue that the Americans failed to sort this out, but we managed it, which implies our approach to the conflict is more efficient than our geopolitical opponents. If Turkey limits its operation to a 30-mile security zone inside Syria and conducts a quick operation, Russia is likely to tolerate it, said Vladimir Frolov, a senior former Russian diplomat. Given Russia's deployment of advanced air defense systems in Syria and its air base there, it has the technical ability to halt any Turkish advance if it wants, he said. If Erdogan wanted to go further into Syria at all, but partition it, Moscow will try to block this by forward deploying a Russian observation post with Russian air cover, predicted Frolov. Russia controls the skies in Syria, and Turkey flies its planes now at Moscow's pleasure. He would stand to gain a great deal of political clout in the Middle East. I'm definitely starting to think that the critics of Russia are correct. However, I will make an additional statement on top of that, saying that this would also make Russia look very saintly in the situation itself. It would make it harder to demonize Russia if they actually succeeded in making peace. Kind of hard to make a villain out of someone who could achieve something that's so universally considered positive. Very hard to vilify them for that. So here's what I would say. If they succeed in this, they look like the good guys for negotiating the peace, and then the people who try and demonize Russia begin to look like villains for demonizing a country that managed to negotiate a peace in Syria. A temporary, even if a temporary peace. They did something good that makes the Russia's critics look like villains. And pretty soon, you'll see a small chain reaction that may lead to several other reactions, resulting in the constant narrative of evil Russia or Russia falling away. Maybe even over a long period of time. But it could be the beginning of a paradigm shift in the Russian narrative in the future. Don't quote me on that, unless you really, really have to. That's just my theory for now. But on to the second article in this video. Turkish police investigate Kurdish leaders fire water cannons at protesters. Shades of France and the Yellow Vests? Anyone? This is also from Reuters, and it says Turkish police have launched criminal investigations into Kurdish lawmakers and detained scores of people, accusing them of criticizing the military's incursion into Syria on social media, state media reported. Police also fired water cannons and detained dozens of activists in the mainly Kurdish southeastern city of Diyarbakir on Thursday at a protest against the cross-border assault. Turkey pounded the Kurdish YPG militia in northeast Syria for a second day on Thursday, forcing tens of thousands of people to flee and killing dozens. Ankara deems the YPG a terrorist group over its links to militants who have waged an insurgency in Turkey. Police in riot gear fired water cannons and then detained protesters at a rally in front of the pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party, or HDP, headquarters in Diyarbakir. The biggest city in the southeast, an HDP party official said police detained 25 members there, including its Diyarbakir provincial leader. Earlier on Thursday, authorities began investigating HDP leaders on detained 21 people for criticizing the military offensive online, state-owned Anadolu news agency said. While most of Turkey's opposition parties have backed the operation, the HDP has called for the offensive to stop, describing it as an invasion attempt. So, apparently, what we're looking at is a situation where people are largely protesting. Let's see here. I'm a little bit tired. So what we're looking at here is a large-scale protest by HDP. They want this conflict to end. But in my experience, rather I should say not in my experience, but within my research, I have never seen a protest of this nature actually make any real progress in stopping conflicts. What it does, though, is it temporarily shifts the focus, where the winning side will shift focus from its opponent to the protesters, and then they become even more violent for a brief period, because it actually draws the eyes of the primary person in the conflict. It draws the eyes of the aggressor, and the aggressor goes after the protesters. Thus, fighting continues. The war goes on hiatus, and an entirely different conflict starts. It's happened before, when you protest a war in the area where the war is taking place. The protesters literally paint a target on their backs. So I agree, criticizing the effort on the part of Turkey is correct. Criticizing the war itself is correct. But you draw this kind of attention to yourself, you're basically just painting a target on your back. HDP leader, co-leader, Cizay Temeli, probably messed that one up, said on Wednesday the operation was an attempt by the government to drum up support and declining public backing. Prosecutors launched an investigation against an HDP's author co-leader Pervin Buldan over their remarks about the offensive, Anadolu said. It said Temeli and Buldan were accused of carrying out propaganda for a terrorist organization and openly insulting Turkey's government. 3 other HDP lawmakers were being investigated over similar charges, the news agency said. The government accuses the HDP of ties to the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK. Militant groups and thousands of members have been prosecuting for the same reason, including its leaders. The HDP denies such links. Hours after the operation started on Wednesday, authorities also launched investigations against 70 individuals who criticized the offensive on social media, Anadolu said. On Thursday, 21 people were detained in the southern province of Mardin for their social media posts. The suspects are accused of provoking the public to hatred and animosity and carrying out propaganda for a terrorist organization, Anadolu said. Later on Thursday, police detained another 11 people linked to the HDP who were protesting in central Ankara against the incursion, Anadolu reported. Authorities launched similar investigations after each of Turkey's 2 previous cross-border operations into Syria. More than 300 people were detained for social media posts criticizing Turkey's offensive into northern Syria in January 2018. So far, the response to the protest has been pretty typical. This is very similar to the yellow vests, the criticism of the yellow vests and the criticism of the white helmets and various other groups, where they first started accusing them of being overly vitriolic and overly critical of the government. Next, they start claiming that they have ties to some evil, shadowy group. The next move, of course, would be to start an investigation. And during this investigation, the police will, of course, ramp up the violence, like cranking up an amplifier, going from 9 to 11. It's happened before. This is standard procedure for most authoritarian powers. It happened with the yellow vests. It happened with the white helmets. It'll happen again here too. So thus far, this has been very typical to form. And I hate to say this, but the fault belongs to Trump. Seriously, the default definitely belongs to Trump. I am all for ending the American empire and pulling out of the Middle East, but pulling out of the Syrian civil war all at once, rather than simply pulling out little bit by little bit, in the case of the Syrian civil war, to prevent situations just like this, like maybe having negotiated a peace before leaving, and instead giving that opportunity to the Russians, of all people. This was a bad call on Trump's part. Now, if you wanted to pull out of Afghanistan or Iran, that would be the right decision. But pulling out of Syria, I'm sorry, but not the hell yet. Of course, I guess I'll make my closing statement that when the only tool you have a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. So you become about as subtle as a hurricane. Anyway, peace!